studying your last two. I swim with tea when they turned in. The styron down to mute. And can learn the pole that sunk he died.
As tax advisors, it's natural to want to jump directly into planning. We want to discuss salary versus dividends. We want to identify tax savings opportunities. We want to build compensation strategies and explore advanced planning ideas. But before any of that happens, there is one critical step that must come first. Review the minute book. This slide introduces one of the most important principles in corporate tax planning. You cannot plan properly until you know who owns what. At the center of the slide, we see the corporate minute book. Think of the minute book as the foundation of the corporation's legal and ownership history. Inside this book are the records that tell us how the corporation is structured and who has rights within that structure. The minute book contains information such as the share register, share classes, directors, shareholders, resolutions, and other important corporate records. These details may seem administrative, but they are actually the starting point for many tax planning opportunities. On the left side of the slide, we see a common advisor mistake. An advisor immediately begins discussing salary, dividends, tax savings, and compensation planning without first reviewing the corporate records. This approach creates risk. If the advisor does not understand the ownership structure, important planning opportunities may be missed. Worse, recommendations may be based on incorrect assumptions. The slide highlights several risks of skipping this step: assuming ownership instead of verifying it, ignoring different share classes, missing planning opportunities, providing incomplete advice, and ultimately making recommendations that may not fit the actual corporate structure. Professional planning begins differently. As shown on the right side of the slide, a professional advisor starts with the records. Before making recommendations, they review the shareholders, the share classes, voting rights, ownership percentages, corporate history, and significant resolutions. Only after understanding these details do they begin building a tax strategy. The flowchart in the center illustrates the correct sequence. First, review the minute book. Second, understand ownership. Third, identify planning opportunities. And finally, build the tax strategy. This order is important because every planning recommendation depends on accurate information. At the bottom of the slide, the building foundation visual reinforces this idea. Just as a building requires a strong foundation before additional floors can be constructed, tax planning requires a strong understanding of the corporation before advanced strategies can be developed. The foundation consists of the minute book, share structure, and corporate records. Only after that foundation is established can we confidently move into compensation planning, dividend planning, estate planning, income splitting, and other advanced tax strategies. The quote on the slide captures the lesson perfectly. You cannot plan properly until you know who owns what. That statement may sound simple, but it is one of the most important habits of successful tax advisors. Great planning is not built on assumptions. It is built on facts. And the first place those facts are found is in the minute book. The key takeaway from this slide is straightforward. Before you discuss tax strategies, compensation plans, or planning opportunities, review the minute book first, because everything else depends on it. Once we've reviewed the minute book, the next step is to understand the corporation's share structure. This is one of the most important parts of corporate tax planning because the share structure tells us who owns the corporation, who controls it, who benefits from future growth, and what planning opportunities may be available. At the center of the slide, we see a corporation connected to its shareholders. This ownership map provides a visual representation of who owns shares in the company. In this example, ownership is spread across several individuals. The primary owner holds the majority interest. A spouse owns a portion of the shares. Adult children may also hold shares. And in some situations, a family trust may participate as well. The exact percentages will differ from one corporation to another, but the principle remains the same. Before making any planning recommendation, the advisor must clearly understand who owns the corporation and how that ownership is organized. On the left side of the slide, the ownership breakdown illustrates another important concept. Ownership is not always concentrated in one individual. Many corporations are structured to involve family members or trusts. These ownership arrangements can create planning opportunities, but they can also create planning restrictions. That is why ownership must always be verified rather than assumed. On the right side of the slide, we see different classes of shares. This is where many important planning opportunities originate. Common shares are typically used to participate in the future growth of the corporation. They often carry voting rights and represent the residual ownership of the company. Preferred shares are different. They may have a fixed value, special rights, or priority treatment in certain situations. They are often used in estate planning, reorganizations, and other advanced tax planning strategies. We also see special classes of shares. These share classes may be customized to provide additional flexibility. Depending on the corporation's structure, they can be used to support different planning objectives and ownership arrangements. The important lesson is that ownership is not determined only by who owns shares. It is also determined by what type of shares they own. Two shareholders may each own shares, but their rights and benefits can be completely different depending on the share class. In the middle of the slide, the share structure components highlight the key areas that every advisor should review. First, who are the shareholders? Second, what share classes exist? Third, who controls voting rights? Fourth, what percentage of ownership does each person hold? And finally, what changes have occurred throughout the corporation's history? Together, these questions provide a complete picture of the corporation's ownership structure. At the bottom of the slide, we see 4 critical questions that every advisor must answer. Who owns the shares? What classes exist? Who controls voting? And who participates in future growth? These questions may seem simple, but the answers often determine what planning strategies are available. They influence compensation planning, income splitting opportunities, succession planning, estate planning, and many other tax strategies that will be discussed later in the course. The most important message from this slide is found at the bottom. Every planning opportunity begins with understanding ownership. Before recommending any strategy, take the time to understand the share structure. Because once you know who owns what, who controls what, and who benefits from growth, you can begin building a tax plan based on facts rather than assumptions. And that is the foundation of effective corporate tax planning. This final slide answers one of the most important questions in corporate tax planning. Why does the share structure matter so much? The answer is simple. Because the share structure determines what planning opportunities are available. At the top of the slide, we see the planning process beginning with a minute book review and share structure analysis. This is where every professional tax planner should start. Before discussing strategies, before running projections, and before making recommendations, we first need to understand how ownership is organized inside the corporation. Once the share structure is understood, a wide range of planning opportunities become visible. The first branch shown on the slide is compensation planning. Questions immediately arise. Should compensation be paid as salary? Should it be paid as dividends? Should a combination of both be used? The answer depends on the ownership structure, the available share classes, and who is entitled to receive distributions from the corporation. Without understanding the share structure, it becomes difficult to evaluate these options properly. The second branch focuses on family planning. This is where ownership becomes even more important. Does a spouse own shares? Do adult children own shares? Are there opportunities for income splitting? Are there tax on split income? Or TOSI? Considerations that need to be addressed? These planning questions cannot be answered accurately until ownership is clearly understood. The third branch focuses on future growth planning. A corporation is not static. Businesses grow, ownership changes, and future opportunities emerge. Questions such as who participates in future growth, whether growth shares exist, whether new investors may be added, or whether a holding company structure should be considered all depend on the current share structure. The fourth branch relates to estate and succession planning. At some point, ownership will likely change. Shares may be transferred to the next generation. An owner may retire. A succession plan may need to be implemented. And the tax consequences of those future events are heavily influenced by how ownership is structured today. This is why experienced tax advisors spend so much time understanding share ownership before discussing advanced planning strategies. On the left side of the slide, we see the risks of skipping this step. Without understanding the share structure, advisors often rely on assumptions rather than facts. Planning opportunities may be missed. Advice may be incomplete. Tax risks may increase. And recommendations may be based on an inaccurate understanding of the corporation. Now compare that with the bottom right side of the slide. When the share structure is properly reviewed, planning becomes far more effective. Recommendations are based on facts. Planning opportunities are identified early. Strategies are designed with confidence. And tax efficiency can often be improved. The visual on the right side shows the positive progression. Correct structure. More planning options. Better outcomes. This perfectly summarizes the value of understanding ownership. The more clearly you understand the structure, the more planning possibilities become available. And the more planning possibilities available, the greater the opportunity to help the client achieve their goals. The key message at the bottom of the slide captures the entire lesson. The share structure determines what planning is possible. Before discussing compensation planning, income splitting, succession planning, or advanced tax strategies, first understand the ownership structure, because every planning recommendation rests on that foundation. The better you understand the structure, the better the plan you can build, and ultimately, the better the outcome for your client.